We saw some fun football in week number 11, but unfortunately a lot of injuries as well to key players like Joe Burrow and Mark Andrews that are going to have long-lasting implications for NFL DFS. And our job today is to break down what that all means for DFS going forward, talk about the Thanksgiving slate on Thursday by taking a look at some salaries there and the Sunday main slate as well, all in recapping week number 11 right here on the Heat Check for today. This is the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Saunas. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, here to recap week number 11 in NFL DFS, outlining key takeaways from injuries, role changes, and more before digging in to salaries on the Thursday Thanksgiving slate and on the Week 12 main slate. We'll do all that here in just 1 second. But first, do want to run through our schedule for this week here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. 3 shows in 3 days, beginning today with the recap. Tomorrow, Thanksgiving slate breakdown with myself and Brandon Gadua. That will be live on the FanDuel YouTube page at noon Eastern, live on FanDuel YouTube, noon Eastern, then up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed after that, and also on FanDuel TV Plus. Then on Wednesday will be our full Week 12 main slate preview. That will also be at noon Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page. So noon Eastern tomorrow and Wednesday, talking Thanksgiving, then the Week 12 main slate respectively, live on the FanDuel YouTube page and up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus after the fact. To get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account, or go to the FanDuel TV Plus app on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. You can watch Up and Adams live there. You can watch Run It Back live there. Covering the spread, Heat Check, Daily ISO, all in the same place. So a fantastic spot to get all the content you love throughout the week. So again, 3 shows this week, noon Eastern, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL, must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only, $5 pregame money line wager required, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text next step to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700, visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana, visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-OPEN-Y or text OPEN-Y in New York. Let's start things off here with our headliner from week number 11, which was the injuries we saw on Thursday Night Football to both Joe Burrow and to Mark Andrews. Let's start things off here by talking about the Burrow side of things. Injured wrist, and he is done for the year. Tried to play through that and could not. Jake Browning came on in Burrow's place Thursday and, not surprisingly, struggled. Took 3 sacks on 17 dropbacks, averaged -0.28, passing net expected points per dropback. Again, NEP is numberFire's expected points metric. League average tends to be around 0.1 or so passing. He was at -0.28, so not ideal there. Browning did throw downfield, but that could have been because they were in a negative game script. Obviously, this would be a massive downgrade for the entire offense. Now, Joe Mixon has not been a guy I've wanted to use the entire year, even when Burrow was healthy. Much less appealing now. And I can probably cross him off, honestly, given how inefficient he has been. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins would not be cross-offs, obviously, but I think the way I would view Chase is similar to how I view Garrett Wilson, where he's going to get lots of volume on a very inefficient offense. So that's not ideal. That's not what you want for a guy as fun as Jamar Chase. maybe he grades out a bit better than that, because I think that I have more faith in this coaching staff to scheme up touches for him the way they did in that Arizona game when Burrow was still not fully healthy. Maybe we see that a lot with Chase. I would need to see it with Higgins before I trust him once he is back. I think with Chase, I'm more willing to, but I would need his salary to come down pretty aggressively in order to justify using him. They're facing Pittsburgh next week. Total in that game is 34.5. Like, I would need the salary to be very, very low to get to Jamar Chase. We'll get to that on the salary scroll because I don't really want to check it. I don't think it'll be a good answer for us, but sucks to lose Joe Burrow. That's definitely not fun. Also in that same game, Mark Andrews hurt his ankle and is likely done for the year. Lamar Jackson still was very good in this game. He averaged 0.36 passing net expected points per dropback. His success rate does dip 2 percentage points this year with Mark Andrews off the field, but when Andrews sat in week 9 last year against the Saints, Lamar still averaged 0.23 passing net expected points per dropback. So a very efficient game from Lamar in that one. So I'm not going to lower expectations for Lamar himself all that much, even with no Mark Andrews. Typically, when you lose a focal point from a passing perspective in an offense, I'm going to downgrade the quarterback. And sure, I do to an extent with Lamar, but I don't want to go too far with that. This did boost Odell Beckham, tied a season high with 7 targets. He did hurt his shoulder late, but it sounds like he's going to wind up being okay, which is good. I actually think Odell, pretty interesting. Rashad Bateman ran 23 routes on 29 dropbacks, earned just 2 targets, though. Bateman this year is at 1.2 yards per route run. Odell is at 2.2, so much better there. Bateman, 17% target per route rate. Odell, 25%. So if both guys are healthy, I prefer Odell as the primary benefactor with Andrews being out, but Bateman would at least be on the radar. And Zay Flowers should continue to get a good number of looks. He had that long touchdown call back, and I think he has a path to upside once again. We could get value in this passing offense. They're playing Sunday night, so maybe not, hopefully we can get value in the main slate eventually, but I do still like this passing offense quite a bit. As for the tight ends, Isaiah Likely had no targets, but played 73% of the snaps, ran 26 routes on 29 dropbacks. Likely has not earned a ton of targets so far this year, but he should get more given they'll have time to plan around not having Andrews going forward. So I'd be willing to buying Isaiah Likely for the single game slate on Sunday night, and I think he'll be in play on full slates down the road. So would not expect him to produce on par with Andrews, but it does definitely help Isaiah Likely, and I think we'll see a big enough role for him to be in play for NFL DFS. So downgrading the Bengals, kind of treating them like the Jets going forward, and then boosting up Odell Beckham primarily with Mark Andrews being out, but also small bump to Rashad Bateman, and would be okay with Isaiah Likely in certain spots. Unfortunately, we have a lot more injuries to discuss. Let's keep with that trend as we transition to the injury section and talk about the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker has what Pete Carroll called a legit oblique strain on Sunday. Geno Smith hurt his tricep for the Seahawks too. And it doesn't sound that serious, but Carroll did not commit to Geno playing for Thanksgiving. He did return in that game, so I'm not sure what that says, but that's definitely one thing to keep an eye on. Big injury here is Kenneth Walker III. Zach Charbonnet took over and played 84% of the snaps. He had 15 carries and 6 targets, and we know this team likes Charbonnet. This is the exact kind of value running back we should want for DFS, where it's guys who were getting work even before the starter got hurt, and we know they will also get work in the passing game. That's what Charbonnet is. They face the 49ers Thursday, which is a very tough matchup, especially with Geno potentially up in the air. So it's not a good environment for the Seahawks offense right now. But I love everything else about what Charbonnet is going to bring to the table. So let's pull up the FanDuel salaries here on Thanksgiving and try to play Name That Salary with Zach Charbonnet. Again, question marks at quarterbacks. That's one thing to consider, but work in the passing game should be the legit feature back against a very tough defense. I would say that's probably worth around $7,300 for Charbonnet, and his salary is $5,800. My goodness. I know it's a bad situation. I know we're going to be wary of this offense if Geno Smith can't go and in this matchup, but That's a really low salary for a guy who's going to play 85% of the snaps. So Zach Charbonnet, the first key value we've got for week number 11 or week 12, talking about that Thanksgiving slate. Charbonnet will be a focal point for us when we have our full preview coming up tomorrow. So Zach Charbonnet, $5,800. Definitely got to keep an eye on. I think that's actually low enough too, where I might get there even if Geno can't go, because it is a very low number. Cooper Kupp hurt his ankle on Sunday and did not return. No timeline yet for Kupp, but that's a pretty big issue to have him be banged up once again, given his age, given the injuries he's had recently. Puka Nacua had 7 targets for 70 yards, averaged 13 targets per game when Kupp was out earlier on this year. Tutu Atwell was at 8.8 targets per game. He ran the same number of routes as Nacua this week as well. And remember, back during that time, they had Van Jefferson on the roster, and they don't have that now. Jefferson wasn't a huge point, just 3.8 targets per game, but that's still something. Tyler Higbee is at 6.5 targets per game. Austin Trammell filled in for Kupp, undrafted guy back in 2021. So I think that Nacua and Atwell would probably get really good work if Kupp were to miss additional time for the Rams. And this is important because next week the Rams are on the road taking on Arizona. Arizona is actually favored in that game right now, which is, I guess, kind of surprising, but potentially justified with Kyler being there. So let's play Name That Salary on Nacua and Atwell for next week. For me personally, looking at Nacua, I think, we're not going to, I don't think we'll see the same target load we saw earlier on this year because the offense has been kind of odd recently, but I would say probably $8,200 for Nacua would be a fair salary. He's at 82 exactly. So I think that one makes a lot of sense. I could be on board with that potentially, depending on how the rest of the slate shakes out. As for Atwell, I would not want the salary high, but he's going to run a lot of routes. It's a very good matchup for him. So I would say probably $5,700 for Tutu Atwell, and he's 57 on the button. So FanDuel pretty on board, pretty on the button with these two Rams guys. But Atwell did have some yardage juice earlier on this year. So Tutu Atwell 57, Puka Nacua 82. Both guys we could potentially consider in that matchup with the Cardinals for next week. Devon Achane hurt his knee at his first game back off of IR. Mike McDaniel said that they received good news, but he'll be further evaluated today. Raheem Mostert was the featured back without Achane. 22 carries, 2 targets, but it's also worth keeping in mind that Jeff Wilson was inactive for this game. I'd be pretty high on Mostert if Achane were to miss more time, but I would want to keep Wilson in mind because Savon Ahmed played pretty well in this game. He's done most of this year. Wilson will get 3 or so carries. So it would be a downgrade from what Mostert did on Sunday, but I would want to keep Wilson in mind overall. As with Achane, I need him to get a full practice before I feel good about him. Did not want to get into full practice this week before he got activated off IR. So I was not as high on him in DFS as I thought I'd be when we talked on Thursday. And I think that we're going to keep that the same way. If he gets in a full practice before they play Friday against the Jets, if we can get a full practice before then, cool. But I need to see that before I feel really good about him there. Aaron Jones left with a knee injury Sunday and did not return. The team said that they don't believe it'll be a long-term issue. Emmanuel Wilson also got banged up on that same drive, which left A.J. Dillon as the only healthy running back in that game. Played 72% of the snaps. Jones and Wilson probably won't be ready for Thursday when they face the Lions. Patrick Taylor is now at the Patriots. He had subbed in previously as being a guy they'd bring up from the practice squad when Jones is out. Only running back on their practice squad is Ellis Merriweather, who I believe was undrafted this year, but shows you where things are at with that. So A.J. Dillon may play every snap on Thursday. That does not guarantee success because Dillon averaged just 57 yards from scrimmage in the 3 games with Jones inactive earlier on this year, but it's at least something. So they play Thanksgiving, as mentioned. They're taking on the Detroit Lions. So it's a tough spot. The Packers are 7.5-point underdogs in that game. Jordan Love did play pretty well Sunday, which does help, but I would say I had Charbonnet around 74. Dillon's a lesser version of that. So I would say probably $6,800, 66, somewhere in there is appropriate for Dillon. And his salary is 66. So very much more so into Charbonnet than Dillon at their respective salaries for Thursday's slate. Hopefully we get Geno because that would help a lot for sure. But Dillon will be an option at least, given that he's probably going to play basically every snap in that game, likely with no Aaron Jones and likely with no Emmanuel Wilson for the Packers. Deontay Foreman left with an ankle injury for the Bears. He was banged up coming into the game as well, so kind of a bummer. Hopefully it was not a re-aggravation of that. Khalil Herbert wound up leading the team with a 44% snap rate in his first game back off IR. He ran 9 routes compared to Roschon Johnson's 5. Nobody was able to get the ball rolling on the ground here, but Herbert definitely holds the usage edge between these two guys. If Foreman does miss more time, I'd expect Herbert to be the lead guy, but I want more production before I feel really, really good and assume that he is a featured back in this backfield. They're playing the Vikings on Monday night. Justin Fields looked really good in that game. We'll talk more about him later on, but I think that does boost the backfield. The running game, like concept-wise, looked pretty good this year too. So interest in that backfield in general, but I want more clarity before we dive in. I think Herbert has a shot to be like a 65% snap rate guy. So interest there, but I do want to see how things shake out with Deontay Foreman. Finally, Tommy DeVito showed some life on Sunday, which kind of makes it a bigger bummer that Darius Slayton left with an arm injury and was ruled out. Slayton, 5 targets, 82 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Hyatt ran 22 routes, which trailed only Saquon Barkley, Daniel Bellinger, and Wan'Dale Robinson. Hyatt's like the type of player I'd want where he can, turn a, break a long one, something like that. But I don't know, man. I think Slayton's just a better player right now than Hyatt is. So if Slayton can't go, that's going to be tough for me to get invested in this offense. Saquon becomes more viable with DeVito being competent, but still want to proceed with a lot of caution on this offense until they give me a true reason to be really, really intrigued by them. Let's transition now and talk about some role updates across week number 11. The Lions backfield remained pretty similar to what it was last week. Jahmyr Gibbs, 56% snap rate. David Montgomery, 41%. Gibbs finished with 6 targets. Both guys had at least 95 yards for the second consecutive game, and both had short touchdowns. It was a 30% red zone share for both those guys, 3 out of 10 chances. So I'm going to keep status quo. This is honestly what I thought it would be after what we saw this past week. So they are a good enough rushing offense where both these guys are viable and a very good matchup taking on the Packers on Thursday. So let's pull out the salaries here for Thursday's slate and dig in. I would say Jahmyr Gibbs, again, we got more confirmation that this is his role, and the role is pretty good, and he played well in it again. Good matchup. I would say that's worth probably $8,200 for Gibbs, and he's 82 on the button. So again, we're very aligned with FanDuel for this week. Montgomery, not the best volume, and I do want passing game work, but he's so good right now, and he's facing the Packers, who can get beat up by guys like Montgomery, as we saw earlier on this year. I think that's probably worth $7,500, which is weird to say, given that Gibbs is 82 justifiably, but I think that's probably where Montgomery should be, and he's at 78. So I like Gibbs more relative to salary, but honestly, we're probably going to want to give long consideration to both, given the matchup that they've got. So this Lions backfield is fun. This Lions team is fun. And that continues as we get more confirmation that the roles we saw last week are basically what to expect going forward. Sticking with that same game, Justin Fields returned for the Bears and went right back to peppering DJ Moore. DJ Moore, 9 out of 22 targets on Sunday. 8 out was 16.2 yards. So Fields in general was chucking it deep. He played very well. Maybe we should get this guy to play indoors more often if they decide to draft a quarterback. Maybe trade Fields to a team that plays indoors. That's my gentle request there. And Fields also ran a ton, 18 carries for 104 yards, which automatically makes Fields viable for daily fantasy. And we know to stack him with. I think that Kmet definitely works, but I prefer DJ Moore given the upside he can have. So the Bears may not be a great team, but their offense is kind of fun right now. And we saw it before the injury. We saw it now with Fields again. More confirmation that they can be in play for DFS. So liked what I saw from Justin Fields and that offense in general on Sunday. With no Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson was a featured back for the Commanders. He had 17 carries and 9 targets, turned that into 131 yards from scrimmage on a 78% snap rate. If Gibson misses more time, we got to be aggressive with Robinson because his role is fantastic. Now, they play Thursday. The problem is they face the Cowboys, and now the Cowboys are 10.5-point favorites in that game against the Commanders. So similar to Charbonnet, it's not a good setup for Robinson, but again, he might play every snap. And he's been pretty good this year, and he's getting passing game work. So again, that's exactly what we want out of a value back. Now, he won't be a value because his salary was 72 on Sunday. I think it should probably be about 78, even accounting for the issues with the potential offense in this game and the issues with the script here. And Robinson on Thursday on FanDuel is $6,700. My goodness, we are going to be able to go nuts on FanDuel on Thursday between Charbonnet and Brian Robinson. Both guys under salaried. Robinson, 16.6 FanDuel points despite having 0 touchdowns. We're going to want to be there. So both Charbonnet and Brian Robinson will be key value plays for Thursday on the Thanksgiving slate, and I'm excited to use both those guys, even with the issues around their respective offenses. Keenan Allen got 16 targets with the Chargers, pass catchers being super thin this past week. Had a lot of guys out. No Jalen Guyton, no Gerald Everett, and no Josh Palmer as well. Palmer's out at least one more game. But beyond Keenan Allen, Donald Parham and Quentin Johnston both had 6 targets. If those guys are out again next week, Parham would be a consideration at tight end. I would need Johnston's salary to be lower than it was this week to use him because he just doesn't get yardage. But Allen deserves his lofty salary. They play Sunday night against the Ravens. Good luck to that defense in that matchup. Parham could be a really key salary saver for the single game slate if you want to jam in both Jackson and Herbert or Jackson and Allen, whatever it may be. Parham could be one of the key salary savers in the matchup, along with Isaiah Likely, potentially, depending on where he settles in. Keaton Mitchell's role creeped up a hair this week, but still slanted towards Gus Edwards. Edwards scored twice again, and that came on just 4 red zone chances. He's been a monster in that regard for a long time now. Edwards basically does need 2 touchdowns to pay off on a full slate, but he keeps getting 2 touchdowns. It's tough to project that, but it is what it is. I'm not on Mitchell yet, but I do think he's worth monitoring still, and it does keep me from wanting to chase Gus Edwards despite the production he has had. Keaton Mitchell on that Sunday night game, maybe you want to go there then, depending on the salary, but Edwards very much worth targeting as well. Zay Jones returned for the Jags, and they had their best game passing in a while. Trevor Lawrence was great in this game against Titans, and it led to a huge Calvin Ridley game. Ridley had 9 targets for 103 yards and 2 touchdowns. 3 of those targets were deep, and 3 were inside the red zone. Now, Nate Tice on the Athletic Football Show last week talked about how Zay Jones not being there forced him to use Ridley in kind of inopportune ways or less than ideal ways. And Ridley's target share is now 26% in games with Zay Jones, whereas Christian Kirk is at 22%. So I think that backs up what Nate was saying there, where with Zay Jones being healthy, we should probably view Ridley in a more positive light. I'm not sure how long Jones will be able to play because he's facing charges of misdemeanor domestic battery. That is obviously awful, and that's a concern for sure. While Jones is out there, I'd be fine boosting Lawrence and feeling pretty good about Ridley because it's basically just fewer snaps for Jamal Agnew, which is going to be a good thing for Trevor Lawrence. So let's take a look at the Jags next week because they are on the main slate and taking on Houston. That's going to be one of the premier games for next week. So let's play Name That Salary first with Ridley. And again, 26% target share in games with Zay Jones. Pretty effective, but there was the spurt where he wasn't getting a lot of work, and that does still matter. I would say it's probably worth $7,200 next week, and Ridley is 71. I can get behind that for sure. Given the composition of that game, given they're playing indoors, I think that all makes sense. So Ridley at 71, on board with that. Lawrence, I think, given that he is now healthier with that knee, he is playing indoors, he has Zay Jones back now, I think that salary probably should be around 78 in a plus matchup. And he's at 78 exactly. So again, FanDuel is on it this week. Salary makers are doing their best, and good job by them because I am in lockstep with most of these guys. But the Jags in general, a fun team to turn back to for next week on the main slate. Michael Wilson missed Sunday with a shoulder injury for the Cardinals, and it led to a huge day for Greg Dortch. Dortch led the Cardinals with 8 targets. Trey McBride had 7. Marquise Brown had 5, while Rondale Moore had just 1. Dortch earns targets whenever he is on the field. Whether it's last year or this year, he earns targets. Not on the field a ton when Wilson's healthy, but he's out there. But Brown was getting deep targets at least, and Kyler was chucking it again. His 8-out was 9.8. Kyler was not the most efficient this past week, and the somewhat spread out target shares were annoying. I'm not really sure how to handle Dortch, Brown, and Moore. If Wilson misses more time, I would be okay avoiding Rondale Moore until I see more. Like, I think he had one, just the touchdown as far as targets go on Sunday. I will be on Trey McBride. That one is pretty definitive. But Dortch and Brown are tougher. So let's say Michael Wilson does not play next week. The Cardinals taking on the Rams, 46-point total is they're at home for this game. So not a bad game overall. I would say Marquise Brown, probably bumping him down to like $6,100 would be appropriate. He's still 65, so a bit too high there. Dortch, I would want around $5,400 to trust him. That's where Wilson was before he got hurt. I liked him at that number, given how much I like that game, but probably where I want to be. Dortch is 48. Okay, that's low enough for me to be intrigued. 8 targets, 76 yards, got some downfield work. So if Wilson can't go again, I would probably be in on Greg Dortch. Potentially beyond game stacks for that game too, given that that's a pretty easy route to targets. And again, he earns targets when he's on the field. So 48 for Greg Dortch, not bad. Trey McBride, I think probably be 62 or so, and he is 61. So big value here is Greg Dortch between these guys, and would not be shocked if I wind up on Dortch next week. I do like Wilson as a player and want to be back, but if he's not back, I would be okay going to Greg Dortch on the Cardinals. Jameson Williams' role continues to creep up. He ran a route on 24 of 37 dropbacks for the Lions, earned the 3 targets, but obviously one of those was a touchdown. And Williams has been targeted on 19% of his routes this year. His yards per route run is 1.3, even with a couple of touchdowns being called back, which is not bad if he continues to have a super low salary. And I would assume he probably does. Williams playing on Thanksgiving. So let's take a look at the Thanksgiving slate once again and see where Williams' salary comes in. We won't need to save salary this week, given we've got Robinson and Charbonnet as being pretty big values. But I would say an appropriate salary for Williams right now would be like $5,600, a guy who has a path to upside, but doesn't have a floor at all. And he's 53 still. So I don't hate that. It's not the steadiest role by any means, but it seems like he's earning more respect from this coaching staff. DPJ was active for this game, but they still got Williams more involved. So I could see myself being there. We're going to have value on Thursday. I could say that for sure. Between Williams, Charbonnet, Robinson, I think we'll have value. And Williams is actually one I feel pretty okay about. At that salary, it's been a rocky start so far, but at that salary, I could definitely see myself being on Williams on Thursday. The Jets bench Zach Wilson in favor of Tim Boyle against the Bills. Boyle was actually even worse than Wilson. Did get rid of the ball faster, but I think that Boyle is actually worse for the offense than Wilson. I know that's probably not a popular opinion given how bad Wilson has been, but it's also Tim Boyle. Like, that's what I would say. I'd be more receptive to keeping them like neutral if Trevor Siemian were to start. That's probably my Northwestern bias showing through with touchdown Trevor, but I want to be low on the offense whenever I can. That's true even when they've got fun players like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. I still really don't want to be there if I can avoid it. So hopefully I can avoid it. That's the hope. They're playing Friday in that game against the Dolphins. That's going to be pretty brutal to watch unless the Dolphins just light it up all by themselves. Dorian Thompson-Robinson was a bit better in his second start for the Browns. Still not good. Averaged negative 0.18, passing net expected points per dropback. Did get rid of the ball quickly, but it did not go far. His 8-out was 3.3 yards, and his completion percentage over expectation was hideous. I think it was like negative double digits. But it was a slight improvement because that's how bad he was the first time. He did funnel the ball to David Njoku, Amari Cooper, and Elijah Moore. Njoku had 15 targets. Cooper had 8, while Moore had 7. I'm not going to touch Elijah Moore, not in this offense. And I'm not going to be high on Cooper or Njoku, but volume is volume. And it seems like DPJ is going to give that, or sorry, not DPJ, DTR, all the D abbreviations on the current and former Browns, but they're at Denver next week. I guess we can check on Njoku to see what his salary is for that game, just because like he is a tight end. He did get a lot of work. He's a good player as well. So let's pull it up here and see Njoku. I just want to check. 57 is too high for this offense for Njoku, and that's where he is. Amari Cooper probably gonna be around 7,000. He is. Don't want that. The Broncos rush defense has been bad. Jerome Ford has had some spurts that are okay. Did lose more work to Kareem Hunt this week than he had previously. Ford's snap rate was 51%. 12 carries, 5 targets isn't bad. And 3 out of 7 red zone chances is okay too. His salary is 67. That's a little bit high as well. I haven't seen a lot of value for the main slate next week yet, but I don't think I want to get it via the Browns, given where their salaries are at in that one. Jaylen Warren had a huge touchdown Sunday, which looked good, but his workload didn't get any better. He had just 9 carries compared to 12 for Najee Harris. And Warren is playing great, so he may eventually pull away here, but it hasn't happened yet. And I'm going to avoid it until it does happen, until Mike Tomlin says it'll happen. Like the way they phrased it last week was Warren was starting for that game in week 10. They did not say he would start going forward, and Harris outsnapped him. Part of that could be because Warren was so efficient, like he didn't need as much work, but he's going to have if the snap rate persists, he will eventually have a bad game, and I don't want to be there when that does happen. They're facing Cincinnati next week, very low total, so I'm going to keep on avoiding this backfield until further notice. Jackson Smith-Njigba is finally getting more downfield work for the Seahawks. He had 4 deep targets on Sunday against the Rams, 2 from Geno Smith and 2 from Drew Lock. He's up to a 15.7% overall target share in games with DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett and Metcalf are both above 23% as well. But Smith-Njigba is becoming more relevant, assuming Geno Smith is okay. And again, they play Thursday. I don't think we'll need the salary savings, especially if we've got Drew Lock starting over Geno Smith for this game. But, Smith-Njigba would be play for a short slate, and his salary is 54. So between him and Williams, I should probably prefer Smith-Njigba because the overall target share is going to be a lot better with him than it will be with Jameson. So maybe we go Njigba, or Smith-Njigba over Williams on the Thursday slate, but I think both are at least options as far as value plays go. So again, we're going to have a lot of salary to spend to get to McCaffrey, to get to CeeDee Lamb, get to Amon-Ra St. Brown, not in the same lineup, but we'll be able to make some fun lineups for Thursday on the Thanksgiving slate. Kyren Williams is eligible to come off IR this week, so it might wind up being moot, but Royce Freeman did inch ahead of Darrell Henderson in the Rams backfield. Freeman outsnapped Henderson 61% to 37%. Henderson had 7 targets compared to Freeman's 0, but Freeman had 17 carries. I don't really want to touch either personally. I may have to consider them because they're facing Arizona, but I'd like to avoid it if I can. We'll see if Kyren Williams is back this week, because if he is, I could be intrigued if he gets in a full practice at some point, but Freeman inching ahead of Henderson right now in that backfield if that is status quo. This would matter more for short slates in full, but Trey Tucker got pretty involved for the Raiders this week. He had 7 targets, which ranked second on the team behind just Devontae Adams, and 5 of those targets for Tucker were deep. Tucker ran a route on just 17 of 43 dropbacks, but when he was out there, he was getting looks. I think this does ding Jacoby Myers more than anything, because Adams had 13 targets, but Myers had just 5. And Myers hasn't really had a huge role for the past month or so. So I'd keep tabs on Trey Tucker for now. I would downgrade Myers and keep Adams pretty much same as usual. Facing Kansas City next week, so negative game script. Maybe we see some more passing attempts there once again. But I'm going to keep it status quo on Adams, downgrade Myers, and probably not get to Tucker just yet. We're going to do a couple of salary scrolls for this week, and we're going to do both Thanksgiving slate and the main slate. So let's start things off with Thanksgiving and take a look at quarterback and run through salaries that stand out for this slate. Dak Prescott, 85. We can make that work, and with how pass-heavy they've been, I'm probably going to want to, honestly. So Dak Prescott, well worth that number on the Thursday slate. Not a great quarterback slate overall. Do you have Jared Goff at 78 against the Packers, and then Brock Purdy at 77. Sam Howell, 73 against the Cowboys. I think that Dak's probably going to be the top guy at each guy's respective salary, especially if Geno at 66 if he is able to go, but Dak, gettable at that number and intriguing for sure. Moving to running back, Christian McCaffrey's salary is 98. We can get there. Well, I think with the value at running back we have between Robinson and Charbonnet, which we already discussed earlier on. Tony Pollard, 72. His first half snap rate this week was 75%, so still pretty good. Didn't lose much more work to Rico Dowdle. I thought he looked better on Sunday than he has recently. Pollard, I would say worth that salary at 72. 12 carries, 5 targets for Pollard in that game. So more targets than he had gotten recently. I think that's a positive for him as well. So Pollard 72, not too shabby. But again, I think the focal points of this slate are going to be Robinson 67 and Charbonnet 58, given the injuries to the other guys in their respective backfields, assuming Walker and Jones cannot go, or and Gibson can't go. If Gibson does wind up being active, that would ding Robinson a pretty decent amount for me personally. Maybe I'd favor AJ Dillon then at 66, but I think I'll like Charbonnet regardless at 58. Wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb 92 with Amon-Ra St. Brown 85. Both guys worth it. Both guys gettable given the value at running back on this slate. DK Metcalf's salary is $7,000. I think that is kind of surprisingly low, similar to Deebo Samuel at 67. Deebo didn't do a ton on Sunday, but had some more rushing attempts, 4 targets, 63 yards. The efficiency was more so to Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, but Deebo can do that same thing. So DK Metcalf, 7,000, Deebo Samuel, 67. Both those guys definitely intriguing to me. Jaden Reed is $5,900, been getting a lot of fun work for the Packers where they get him like these creative jet sweeps. They get him a lot of work in towards the red zone. He's been paying off for DFS, $5,900. I could be myself being into that. The target shares on the Packers in general suck. And that's why Christian Watson's salary is down to 56. So I'll want to dig into Dobbs' workload, Reed's workload with all those guys being healthy. But Reed is the one to me, with the way they use him, as the one who stands out most at the first look here. Brandon Cooks, 57. His role, like from a snap perspective, was still good when that game was competitive on Sunday. Didn't get a ton of work, but I also didn't expect him to, given that he's outdoors, playing on the road. It's a better setup for Cooks to be indoors at home. So 57 for him on Thursday could be a fun way to get low-salaried exposure to the Cowboys' passing offense. Already discussed Jackson Smith and Jigba and Jameson Williams. I thought I might be intrigued by Jalen Tolbert as a value play, but we've got Williams or Smith and Jigba both in the low 5,000. I don't think I'll need to get to Tolbert just yet. He's still he and Michael Gallup are basically like splitting work right now. So I'll go to those other guys above him. Tight end Kittle 72. That makes sense. Laporta 65 also makes sense. Jake Ferguson 61. No real values there. Logan Thomas could be a value. Got a couple of deep targets on Sunday from Sam Howell. 8 targets overall. They're going to have to throw quite a bit. So maybe if you want a value tight end, Logan Thomas could wind up being your guy at $5,200. Don't think any other value tight ends will really grade out well for me. So yeah, probably Logan Thomas there. So key values for the Thursday slate at first look are going to be Zach Charbonnet, 58. Brian Robinson, if Gibson can't go once again, and then potentially Jameson Williams and Jackson Smith and Jigba, but do like the salaries on DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel as well. Now let's shift focus here and talk about the Sunday main slate. Again, the key game on the slate, to me at least, is Houston versus Jacksonville. 46-point total there, tight spread. We also have a high total tight spread for the Rams and Cardinals, but I don't feel as good about that one. And then the banger game to close things out is the Bills and the Eagles. 47.5-point total. Spread is 3.5 in favor of Philadelphia for that one. We'll get more read on that workload distribution for the Eagles tonight in that game. But starting off a quarterback, really good quarterback slate, because Josh Allen is 92, taking on Jalen Hurts, 88, and then Patrick Mahomes taking on the Raiders, 87. I have no pushback on any of those salaries. I think those are all great. So feel good about all those guys. Mahomes facing the Raiders. So playing indoors potentially could be a blowout, but he could put up a lot of points in said blowout. Scrolling down here, mentioned before, Lawrence is pretty appropriate. I probably prefer CJ Stroud at 77 in that exact same game. Jags have funneled some work towards the pass so far this year, so that benefits Stroud. He's been good. He's playing indoors. He's been lethal on deep throws so far this year, so probably we'll be looking at Stroud once again at 77 on the main slate. Scrolling down further, not seeing anything that stands out in the low range. And honestly, like if you can get to the stud quarterbacks, you probably should. So I would say it's a priority to get to 77 or higher, with Stroud being there, Lawrence at 78, and then Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen. That does not look like a slate where you want to spend down at quarterback. Shifting over to running back, it does help that we have no Eckler on this slate. We have no Christian McCaffrey, so we don't need to allocate as much salary towards the running back as we typically may. Let's scroll down here and try to find some guys who stand out at their respective salaries, though. Jonathan Taylor's in a pretty tough matchup against Tampa Bay, but really good role before their bye week. I could see potentially being intrigued by that at $7,500. Not like a massive value, but not bad. Bijan Robinson, 74, taking on the Saints. Ritter back starting once again, but Robinson's role before their bye week was pretty good. 22 carries in that game. He had not topped 14 since week 2 before that. So Robinson, 74. I've been there a lot recently. Will likely want to go back once again. If there is no Dameon Pierce again, Devin Singletary's salary is $7,300. 22 carries, 2 targets in this game. Looked good again. And I think we got to just respect the role. 85% snap rate in a game we like. If there is no Dameon Pierce, I think that Singletary once again would be in play at $7,300. Rachaad White continues to get a ton of targets for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's been really bad from an efficiency perspective running the football, but it hasn't mattered because his passing game work has been so good. They're taking on the Colts coming out their bye week, but the Colts tend to play in like weird, chaotic games. I'd want to look at what my total has for that one. I guess this won't be updated from last night yet because I don't have that in this sheet specifically yet, but I've got that closer to 41. I don't think that will go up from where what happened on Sunday, but Rachaad White, his role is probably better than what you'd expect out of most guys at $7,000, given all the work he gets in the passing game. So wouldn't be shocked if I'm intrigued by him there. Isaiah Pacheco, 66, taking on Las Vegas. Maybe that's the better route to getting access to the Chiefs. I know that he hasn't had huge games so far, but it's the Raiders. The Raiders been pretty bad against the rush so far this year. Pacheco, they've shown more faith in him recently than they did earlier on this year. Higher snap rates. So Pacheco at $6,600, I would like to be there if I can potentially. We'll want to see what his role looks like for tonight first, but definitely could see myself being there at 66 in order to save some salary on Sunday to get to all of those fun quarterbacks. Don't see a lot else that stands out in the lower salary ranges unless we get some injury news. So probably Pacheco, the main value at running back at 66, but then digging into Rachaad White, digging into Singletary, Bijan, guys like that, if we want to get more flexibility to get to the quarterbacks. Over at wide receiver, I'm going to scroll down here a little bit to see what stands out. Jamar Chase is still 81. That's not low enough given the quarterback situation for me to be intrigued by that. So I'd want that to come down more. Tank Dell's salary is 78, but honestly, like, fair. He had 5 more deep targets on Sunday, 149 yards in that game. CJ Stroud has been phenomenal on deep throws so far this year, and Dell has benefited from that. So it's 78, but also I get it. We talked before about Calvin Ridley in that exact same game. He's 71. So Dell, Ridley stacks will be on the table for sure. Devontae Smith is 74. I expect him to have a pretty good role with no Dallas Goedert. We'll see what that looks like for tonight first, but I'm kind of hoping he doesn't do a ton in that game so we can get him at 74 at a lower roster rate against the Bills, because Smith last year with no Goddard, 25% target share, probably going to be around there once again this year in a game we're going to want to stack. I would really like to get to Devontae Smith at 74, so hoping he's a bit more quiet tonight. Nico Collins, 69, taking on Jacksonville. He didn't do a ton on Sunday, but he had 11 targets. I think he had a bunch inside the red zone as well. I think he had four or 5 targets inside the red zone for the Texans in that game. So he's going to get some high leverage work. We saw him have big yardage games earlier in the year. Now it was before Dell really came on the scene fully, but yeah, 5 deep targets for Nico, or 5 red zone targets for Nico Collins. He had 1 deep target. 69 for him, not bad, as a way to save some salary while getting exposure to that Jacksonville Texans game, and then also Christian Kirk, 68 in that exact same game. Bumping down further at receiver, Haven't seen a lot of upside from Chris Godwin yet. He's $6,400, 39 yards Sunday. It might be a fun game, but I don't know if the yardage upside is there for him right now. Gabe Davis down to 6,000. He's had some rough matchups for receivers recently. You don't want to use outside receivers against the Jets, so 0 targets in that game. Denver's got some decent cornerbacks. I'd be receptive if there's no Dawson Knox still, because Davis' salary is 6,000. Still ran a ton of routes on Sunday, but if Knox comes back, that introduces some more uncertainty into the situation. But Davis 6,000, at least someone I'd want to dig into a bit more. If there's no Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed could be interesting at $5,800. He has had like good target loads so far this year. 9 targets. A lot of those came from Jameis in the game before their bye week for only 24 yards, but like he's a good football player, I think. So Shaheed potentially in play if there's no Michael Thomas. They're taking on Atlanta, not a good pass defense. So be okay with Shaheed. Rashee Rice is 57, taking on the Raiders. Depending on what his role looks like coming out of the bye, I could see them getting him more expanded workload as he's a rookie. They had the bye to ramp him up. We know Andy Reid can work some magic across bye weeks. So Rashee Rice 57 stands out. I'd probably prefer him over Shaheed, but okay with both guys in general. Down further at receiver, not seeing a lot that stands out. Do still like Marvin Mims' route rate, but not getting a lot of targets facing Cleveland. So I think probably sticking more so to guys like Rashee Rice at 57, like Rashid Shaheed at 58, and then potentially Gabe Davis, question mark, at 6,000 if we want some value at wide receiver. Travis Kelce's a bit undersalaries at 83, I think, taking on the Raiders. And whenever the Chiefs are in a decent spot, we know where the ball will go. I know he didn't do a whole lot for their bye week, but bye to get healthy, did some traveling over his bye week, so wasn't resting as much as maybe you would hope. But, good yardage upside. He hasn't had a multi-touchdown game yet this year, which he will eventually. So Kelce 83 is probably lower than I thought he would be. Scroll down further at tight end. Dalton Kincaid is still 6,000 for that Eagles game. Not sure if Knox will be back for this game. I'm not sure if it matters, honestly, given that they've been efficient with Kincaid and he's looked really good. So I think he's probably done enough to be in play, even if Knox is able to return there. Another 7 targets for Kincaid on Sunday. Deep target, but didn't catch it. So some evolution in his role recently. I would like to be there if I can. Down further at tight end, not seeing a lot that stands out to me. So probably primarily looking at Kincaid at $6,000 as far as lower salary guys, but it might be a slate to spend up at quarterback, spend up at tight end with Travis Kelce as a way to gain more upside for the week. That's all we got here for today for the recap podcast. But as mentioned, it's a 3 podcast week here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. Tomorrow and Wednesday, noon Eastern, live on the FanDuel YouTube page and up on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and FanDuel TV Plus after that. So make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify, and make sure you download FanDuel TV Plus on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can also find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis and find FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down the Thanksgiving 3-game slate with Brandon Gadula. Have fun until then and enjoy Eagles and Chiefs for tonight. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.